You need a 1500 plus SAT score fast, so instead of stressing out and relying on outdated study guides, I'm going to explain step by step how to boost your score by 50 to 150 plus points in just 7 days. This is not crap. I know there's no magic hack to instantly gain SAT points, and you know that too. But all I want to do in this video is introduce 2 key concepts that you need to implement into your preparation, and that's quite literally it. Okay, so let's first start off with the SAT math section. College Board loves to test a variety of mathematical concepts, right? And sometimes the surface level presentation of these questions can be super misleading. Say, for example, you have a simple geometry problem, which might require algebra to solve, right? Or you have a word problem that might seem complicated at first glance, but only asks you to set up a basic equation. Now, the SAT math section, despite its reputation, is not just a series of random isolated questions. There's actually an underlying structure to the kinds of problems that it throws at you, okay? And the key to conquering it is with a super systemic approach called the funnel system. Funnel system is a structured step-by-step method that helps you quickly identify what each problem demands, okay? So it filters out any irrelevant approaches and funnels your focus towards the most effective strategy. The more that you apply it, the more instinctive it becomes, which allows you in turn to apply razor-sharp precision to your problem solving while simultaneously maintaining your efficiency and confidence even under the DSAT time pressure, okay? So there's a couple stages to the funnel system, which I will explain now in the theory portion of the video. So the first stage is opening the funnel or recognizing the problem type, okay? So the first step is all about recognition. When you open our so-called funnel, you're casting a super wide net, all right? Your goal is to immediately identify what kind of problem you're facing and filter out any extraneous approaches, all right? So essentially here, the objective is to just simply classify the problem type. So ask yourself these questions next time you see the SAT math section. Does it ask for a quantity, like an area or a volume? Then you're probably dealing with geometry. Are there variables involved? Well, that's algebra, systems of equations. Does the problem have interpreting data? That's stats, probability. And does the problem involve rates times distance? Those are often word problems, okay? And this is important because when you recognize the category of the problem quickly, which if you do practice problems, this will come to you supernaturally and subconsciously, you will immediately limit the methods you need to consider. And then you can throw out any irrelevant techniques that might only waste time and mental energy. At this stage, the key is recognition and categorization, right? And it should happen quickly because this is where the funnel's broad opening starts to narrow. So for stage 2 of the funnel, we're gonna be narrowing that funnel or eliminating irrelevant methods. So now that you've recognized the problem type, it's actually time to filter out those unnecessary approaches, right? So this stage is all about quickly analyzing what methods will be the most effective for solving the problem and then discarding those that don't fit. So key questions to ask yourself are, what tools do I need to solve this problem? So if you're solving an algebraic equation, you might want to use substitution or factoring or maybe even the quadratic formula. If you're doing geometry problems, you might need to recall specific formulas which are provided, right? And word problems often do require you to set up equations, but you don't need to go into full detail yet, right? Pick out the important parts, see what kinds of numbers and problem types you're dealing with first. Next, which methods would be overly complex, all right? Many students make the mistake of just jumping in without taking a step back and really analyzing the problem, all right? Because if you're being asked to solve something with a simple formula, but then you're considering some complex algebraic manipulation instead, that's super common, right? If you're a student who's maybe taking a math above algebra 2 and you've done stuff, with calculus or just more advanced math, then your brain might jump to a different sphere than what the SAT is actually trying to test, right? But maybe you're looking at a problem that just needs one step. So don't fall into the trap of overcomplicating things with unnecessary solutions. Okay, so for step 2, that's where efficiency is essentially starting to take root. Your only goal here is to just filter out the methods that are overkill and narrow your focus, all right? So if you have a geometry problem about finding the area of a circle, the funnel, all right, our step 2 funnel is going to eliminate any need to consider trig identities or super complex algebra, right? Stage 3, we're going to be focusing the funnel, all right? So that's going to be where you're going to select and apply the core method, because by now you've filtered out the irrelevant techniques. And this is where the core method comes into play. Now, it's all about your focus, okay? Because you've narrowed down the problem type and the method you need. The key now is just precision, all right? Because if you're familiar with the problem type, you know step by step how to do it, it's now just execution. So this is now where you execute your solution with laser focus, all right? And at this point, the funnel has essentially effectively funneled you into one or two possible methods, and you're going to apply them. Now, when you're executing your solution, make sure you are on track by 1, reviewing the problem briefly, right? So before you actually execute the solution, glance over the question one more time to make sure you're not missing something. Okay, this is especially important for stuff like word problems, where small details can significantly alter your final solution. You need to apply the chosen method methodically, okay? So once you've focused on a solution path, you need to stick with it. Now, this is going to be a bad example because if you do get a quadratic equation, plug it into Desmos, super easy to find the solutions. But let's just say, for example, you were solving for x in a quadratic equation by hand, right? You need to follow through with all the necessary steps, that being factoring, then substituting in and applying the quadratic formula. So why exactly is the execution part so important? Well, it's because this is where the majority of your score comes from, right? The actual solving of the question. And by this point, you should be working at full efficiency, right? You're applying the right method and solving the problem in the most direct way possible. And the earlier stages of the funnel set you up for success here in step 3. Stage 4 of our funnel is a final review or post-funnel check. Because once you've quote unquote solved the problem, you still need to give a final review stage. And this does not have to take super long. I'm talking maybe a 5 to 10 second review, even more, especially on, say, module 1, where you have the time to be much more careful and dedicate to reviewing your answers, right? Now, the reason is because this is such a crucial step that most students skip because they feel like they're in a rush or they feel like they've done enough, right? Never get lazy like that. This last step is all about catching any potential mistakes before you move on to the rest of the test, okay? So here's how you're going to do it. You're going to quote unquote reopen our funnel slightly for the brief moment, all right? And you're going to scan the question and your solution to ensure everything matches up from stage 1 to stage 3. So what exactly are you going to review? Well, you need to ask yourself, does your answer make sense given the context, right? So if the problem involves solving something tangible like distance or time, does your answer seem realistic, right? If you end up with the answer that's way too big or way too small, it's a red flag. Next thing you need to do is ask yourself, is there a simpler, more efficient solution that you missed, right? So check if your steps were as efficient as possible. Could there have been a more faster way to solve the problem that you missed by overthinking it? And this is also a great way to check your final answer with a alternative solution, given that you have the time. There are a couple final actionable steps to apply to make your funnel system even better on test day. From now until test day, you want to speed up your problem identification. Now, stuff like seeing a formula like area equals pi r squared, right? Those are super obvious things with geometry. But there are also cases where, say, for example, you have increasing the side length of a square by 50%. You might think, oh, square, geometry. But in reality, the best way to solve that problem where you're dealing with percent increases is with a certain algebraic formula, or maybe you're even setting up systems of equations. As you'll see, there are some videos and questions on our channel where you do need to employ those strategies. And so it's just super, super useful to use the funnel system and those approaches. 2 is to limit your approaches. So focus on the common, most efficient techniques and never go for the complicated solutions unless absolutely necessary or you're just completely lost. Number 3 is to stay calm and trust the funnel. Right? The more you apply the system, the more instinctive it becomes. Right? Remember, instinct. You need to trust yourself to go through the stages quickly without overthinking. Because this is how the SAT math section works, right? 95% of questions, there's a step-by-step process. There's the most efficient technical way to solve a problem. If you do practice problems, that's great and all. That might train you to subconsciously use the funnel system, but if you're aware of it and you're using that actively on the test day papers, that is where you're going to get the most benefit from our overall funnel system and score higher on the SAT math section. Number 4 is to flag those harder problems. All right, if the funnel doesn't lead to an immediate aha moment, right? Like I know exactly step by step how to solve this because I've had experience with it before, then flag the question and move on, because you want to use your review time to revisit those harder questions, which in many cases are worth less points because they're difficult, right? You get docked more points for missing easy questions on the SAT math section. All right, so now let's move on to the SAT English section, which consists of the reading and writing or grammar parts, and it's essentially designed to test your ability to understand and interpret the English language, right? So the goal here isn't to flex your creativity or offer some weird interpretations of a passage. Instead, it's all about quite literally literal understanding, textual evidence, and decoding the language exactly how it's presented in the text, okay? So this is where the mute lawyer analogy comes in. Imagine you're a lawyer in a courtroom. You're tasked with defending your answer. However, you've been rendered mute, so you can't speak, explain, or justify your answer with your own mouth. All you can do is point to evidence in the text to support your answer or claims, right? So why exactly is this important? Well, because the SAT does not reward nuanced creative thinking like your English class does, right? So if you find yourself quote unquote thinking outside of the box or coming up with answers that make sense to you but don't directly match the text, you're likely on the wrong track. The key to excelling on the SAT English section is to not overcomplicate things or inject your own thoughts into the material. Okay, the material is cold and treat it as that. Right? So the correct answer is always the one that is most directly supported by the words in the text. It will be explicitly there. Right? So by adopting this mute lawyer mindset, you're training yourself to not only focus on the most literal evidence-based interpretations of the passage, but there's no room for mental gymnastics or any personal bias. Stage 1 is just reading the passage. Okay, that's the mute lawyer's first move. The first step in applying this technique is all about just reading the passage carefully, but not for the purpose of general understanding or interpretation. All right, that's the trap. Instead, you're focusing on exactly what is being said with a keen eye for factual details and direct meaning. All right, so the key mindset you want to take on here is you're not interpreting, you're simply observing, okay? So then you might be saying, okay, so I'm reading this, but what am I looking for, right? Here are 3 things you are looking for when you're reading the passage for the first time. 1 is literal meaning. So is the passage discussing something specific, like an event or idea, and focus on exactly what is being stated without trying to infer something of deeper meaning, okay? Because there's nothing nuanced going on. It's just explicit text in front of you. Number 2 is the tone and language. Pay attention to how the writer says something, right? Specific wording, sentence structure, and even punctuation might carry super important clues for answering the question later on. And number 3 is context clues. So identify those surrounding phrases that give more meaning to the key sentences or words so they build on top of each other, right? Especially if it's something like an argument. You might be wondering why this matters, right? Why stage 1? Why read the passage like this? Well, because if you read like this, it helps you not overthink. It helps you avoid any misinterpretations, trying to read between the lines, right? You're looking for exactly what is explicitly written, not what could be possibly implied, right? Implications are very dangerous. Now, stage 2 is identifying the correct answer by pointing to the evidence. Okay, so once you've read the passage with the mute lawyer mindset, you're ready to tackle the actual question. This is where the mute lawyer technique truly kicks in, all right? So now you need to choose the answer that best fits the literal meaning of the passage and can be defended by direct evidence from the text. So here are a couple key questions to ask yourself when you're trying to make the choice. Can I find a specific line or phrase that directly supports this choice? And is this the most reasonable literal interpretation of the passage, or am I reading between the lines? Now be careful here. There's a lot of traps, right? Just because you see something that is word for word in the passage and then you see the same word for word answer as one of the answer choices, that doesn't mean it's the correct answer, right? Even though you're looking for exact wording, you still have to be careful of those traps. So for stage 2, you're going to be looking for consistency with the context. So the answer should align with the context of the passage. This is so common. If you look at tons of SAT problems, especially English ones with those long reading passages, you can almost immediately eliminate, say, 1 or 2 answer choices simply because it has nothing to do with the context of the passage or align with the context of what the question is asking, okay? Next is the tone, and then it's the overall theme without adding interpretation or creative reasoning to that end, all right? Now, next is clear support. So the answer that you choose should be defensible by pointing directly at words or phrases from the text, okay? And if you can't find any evidence, it's probably the wrong answer. So the bottom line is that the SAT doesn't care about your opinion, both on the section and literally in real life, in my opinion. It cares about your ability to instead interpret the text, literally and directly. I'm going to say that again, literally and directly. Okay, so by focusing solely on the evidence and staying close to the text, you ensure that your answer matches the intended message of that passage, and so you can get those questions correct. Stage 3 of the mute lawyer technique is eliminating the misleading answers and avoiding creative thinking. Now you might be thinking, okay, this is weird, right? Because I thought I was supposed to eliminate the misleading answers first and then pick the correct answer, right? But let me explain. So after you read the passage and identify the correct answer, which you have sufficient evidence for from the actual passage, then you find that some of the answer choices are, designed to mislead you into thinking they're correct, but they're enticing to pick, right? These answers might seem, quote unquote, plausible, but they often require you to go beyond the text in a way that's not supported directly by the passage. So you want to take on the mindset that, just be wary that these answers that might seem reasonable, but they lack evidence, right? So how exactly do you find these sorts of misleading answers? How do you not fall for these traps? Well, a couple common things that these answer choices have in common is that, one, they're too broad or too vague, right? So let's say the answer is really general or it feels like just a personal interpretation, then it's probably a trap, right? The correct answer should be specific and clearly supported by text evidence. Next is contradictions, right? So watch for any answers that contradict the tone of the passage, even if they feel like they're true in a general sense. If it doesn't apply to the passage, that's wrong. And next is a creative spin, right? So if the answer requires you to do some mental gymnastics, like infer something or read between the lines, it's almost certainly wrong. Trust the evidence that's directly in front of you instead of trying to do something fancy, all right? So the SAT reading section is really just designed to test your ability to stick with the text. Anything that goes beyond the literal text is either irrelevant or incorrect in most cases. The last stage of the mute lawyer technique is just to review your answer or the mute lawyer check. So once you've selected your answer, you need to take a moment to check your defense, right? Just as a mute lawyer would defend their answer by pointing at the text, you need to revisit the relevant part of the passage to ensure that your choice is well supported by the evidence that you initially chose, all right? So always try to confirm your answer by pointing, quite literally pointing at the words that justify it, okay? So revisit the key passage. So go to the specific lines or the sections that are the most relevant to the question and ask yourself, are you still confident that your answer matches the evidence in the text? And then go through and eliminate those unnecessary answers, right? So if you identified an answer, try to quickly eliminate any choices that don't match the direct language or tone in the passage. Look for clear contradictions or any wording that doesn't align with what the text actually says. And so the bottom line here is that the SAT values accuracy and efficiency. So if you review your answer through the lens of a mute lawyer, you're going to prevent overthinking and ensure you're not swayed by any extraneous or irrelevant information, which is what makes the SAT English section hard, because students focus on that creative thinking instead of thinking as objectively as cold as possible, all right? So a couple of final actionable tips for the mute lawyer technique. Train your reading for literal understanding. So when you read, try to avoid forming any judgments or opinions about the content. Focus on the words in front of you and the direct meaning. Next is scan for direct evidence. I mean, I repeated this so many times. Always ask yourself, what part of the text directly supports this answer? If you can't find a clear reference, the answer is likely not the right one. Trust the process, right? The more you practice with the mute lawyer technique, the more comfortable you're gonna get with it, and then the more automatic this method becomes. So stick to the evidence and trust that the correct answer will always be grounded in the text. You can see how the mute lawyer technique will really shift your mindset from a creative interpretation to literal evidence-based reasoning, which is what the SAT tests. Okay, so it helps you avoid traps, and it's going to improve your reading comprehension and ultimately help you answer more SAT English questions correct and get that coveted 1500 plus. All right. So to round off the video, I just want to touch upon a couple last tips and things to keep in mind. All right. So let's say you're stuck on a math question. Look at your reference sheet, right? So think of any relevant formulas you could look at, because these spark ideas within your mind to potentially create solutions, right? Think about your funnel. If you're lost about where to start, or the step-by-step process, looking at a formula will give you certain ideas, right? So if you look at, this is not given, but say you have the quadratic formula, right? So if you have the quadratic formula and you're looking at a quadratic problem, then you might be able to deduce some part of the quadratic formula, like negative b over 2a, right? So that gives you something specific about that quadratic that you could then use to solve the problem. Next, if you have a weird question, feel free to skip it, right? So if it's a weird question, first off, it's likely experimental, so don't waste your time and move on. And next, if it's strange, then it's probably a difficult question and not worth your time invested there. Instead, you should do all the easy questions first. That way you don't lose out on time and lose out on more points than you need to. Next, try and make the reading fun. So before you approach a passage, try and trick your brain to think that reading passage is going to be really interesting, because that's going to improve your comprehension and focus as you go in. Next is reduce variables on test day. So if you want to have the best performance, make sure you plan your day ahead, right? Food, clothing, timing, everything, so you can focus on the test entirely. Next, drink water. I think that's self-explanatory. On module 1, be super careful. So don't just be lazy. Oh, this is so easy. No, be as disciplined as you would on module 2. Trust me. All right. And for English, a really, really common trick that students use is starting at question 15, 16-ish. Those are the grammar questions. Those are usually easier than the long reading passages. So start with those questions first, and then you go through to the vocab and then the long reading passages. The thing here is just to warm up before the test. So read something light in the morning to get your brain into reading mode and comprehension before the SAT starts. Read something for fun, right? Just relax. Don't put too much stress on yourself. But now's the time to really, 7 days out from the actual exam, try to do your best, right? To implement the tips that you've learned in this video, the strategies, the mute lawyer technique for the English section, the funnel system for the math section. And if you guys need more help and you want more practice questions, then I'm going to link our full SAT prep course with English questions, math questions, everything you need somewhere on the screen. Yeah, that does it for the video, guys. If you found this video helpful, make sure you subscribe, and good luck on your SAT.